I want you to picture something with me for a second. A garden in the last week of July. Tomato vines heavy enough to need 3 stakes each. Squash leaves the size of dinner plates, not a hole in a single one of them. Cabbage heads tight as a fist, no green worms hiding in the folds. Now here's the thing. That's not a garden I sprayed with anything you'd find at the feed store. That's not a garden I fussed over with store-bought bug killer every Sunday afternoon. That's a garden that got left alone to do most of the fighting itself, because somebody taught me, a long time ago, how to set it up that way before the bugs ever showed up. And by the end of this video, I'm going to walk you through every piece of it, the way it was walked through with me, standing in the dirt, not read out of some pamphlet. Now, some of you are new here, so let me tell you plain who I am, and why you ought to listen to an old man talk about bugs. My name's Walt Higgins. I was raised on a farm in hill country, the kind of place where, if the garden failed, you felt it at the table come January. My grandfather ran that farm through the worst years this country's ever seen. The Depression years, when there wasn't 2 nickels to rub together for a bottle of anything, chemical or otherwise. He taught my father how to keep a garden alive without spending a dime you didn't have. My father taught me. And what I'm fixing to share with you today isn't something I read in a magazine last month. It's something that got handed down at the end of a hoe, 3 generations deep, and it still works exactly the same today as it did back then. Because bugs haven't changed, and neither has good sense. Now, I want to say something plain, because I think it needs saying. I'm not against a farmer using what he needs to use to keep his family fed. I've got nothing against anybody scraping by however they can. But somewhere along the way, a lot of us got sold the idea that a garden needs a chemical company standing behind it to survive. That you can't grow a decent tomato without a bottle from the hardware store. And I'll tell you, my grandfather never had that bottle, never had the money for it even if he'd wanted it. And his garden fed a family of 8 clean through the worst years this country's ever seen. What he had instead was patience, and a way of working with the bugs instead of against them. That's the whole difference between what I'm going to show you today and what gets sold to you on a shelf. Here's the honest truth though, and I'll admit it right up front. For a good stretch of my own gardening life, I strayed from what I was taught. I got busy. I got lazy in some ways. And when the aphids showed up on my beans, or the hornworms started stripping my tomato plants down to bare stems, I did what everybody around me was doing. I went and bought a bottle off the shelf and sprayed the whole bed down. And it worked, for about a week, maybe 2. Then the bugs came right back, same as before, sometimes worse, because I'd killed off the good bugs right along with the bad ones. It took me longer than I'd like to admit to go back and really listen to what my grandfather had drilled into my father's head all those years ago. And when I finally did go back to those old ways, full and complete, not just here and there, the difference wasn't small. It was night and day. Now before I get too far along, I do want to mention something. Everything I'm walking you through today, and a whole lot more besides. The full soil building calendar, the exact companion pairings for every vegetable we grow, the complete home remedy recipes my grandmother kept in a tin box by the stove. All of it is written out step by step in the Depression-era survival manual. I put that together because I got tired of people asking me the same questions in the comments every week, and I figured it was easier to just write the whole thing down once and for all, the way it was taught to me. There's a link down in the description if you want to keep it on hand, out in the garden shed, or on the kitchen table where you can actually use it, instead of trying to remember an old man rambling on a video. All right, let's get into it. The very first thing my grandfather ever told my father about bugs, and the very first thing my father ever told me, is that if you're standing over a plant staring at a bug, you're already about 2 months too late. Most folks, myself included for a long stretch, look at chewed up leaves and think the problem is the leaf. It isn't. The problem started back in the spring, in the ground, before that seed ever went in. Here's the why of it. The way it was explained to me sitting on an overturned bucket while my father worked the beds. A plant that's grown in weak, thin, worn-out dirt comes up weak and thin itself. Its stem walls are soft. Its leaves don't have much backbone to them. And bugs, same as any predator, go looking for the weak ones first. But a plant that's grown in rich, living soil that's got real body to it, comes up thick-stemmed and tough-skinned, and it can shrug off a fair bit of nibbling without ever slowing down. My grandfather used to say, a strong plant can afford to feed a few bugs. A weak plant can't afford to feed one. So here's what we do about it, And this is the same thing done on our place every single spring without fail. Before anything goes in the ground, we spread a good 2 to 3 inches of well-aged compost across the whole bed and work it down into the top 6 inches or so of soil. If you've got access to aged manure, and on a working farm you generally do, that's even better mixed right in with the compost. Cow manure, horse manure, whatever you've got, but it has to be aged, at least 6 months to a year old, or it'll burn your plants worse than any bug ever could. This isn't a one-time fix though, and I want to be honest with you about that. This is a habit you keep up year after year. My grandfather built his soil for decades. My father kept building on what he started, and I'm still adding to dirt that's had 3 generations of care poured into it. You won't see the full difference the first spring. You'll start noticing it by year 2 or 3, when your plants come up thicker and darker green than they used to, and the bug damage that used to strip a plant bare barely leaves a mark. One thing worth knowing, depending on where you're gardening, if you're up north where the growing season is short, get that compost worked in as early as the ground will let you, 3 or 4 weeks before your last frost, so the soil has time to wake up before you're transplanting into it. Down south, where things warm up early, you can get that compost in during late winter and get a jump on the season. I'd rank this one a full 5 out of 5. It's the foundation everything else is built on, and if you skip it, the rest of what I'm about to tell you won't work near as well. This next one is the piece that changed my whole way of thinking about a garden, and it took me the longest to really understand why it worked. Most of us, myself included for years, plant in neat rows. Tomatoes here, beans over there, a long stretch of cabbage off to the side. It looks tidy. It makes picking easier. But to a bug, a long straight row of one single crop is nothing short of a dinner bell ringing. My grandmother, who kept the kitchen garden right up close to the house while my grandfather worked the bigger fields, never once planted anything by itself. Everything had a neighbor. And here's the why behind it, as best as I understand it after all these years. Most garden pests find their supper by smell. They're following a scent trail straight to the plant they're hunting for. When you tuck strong-smelling herbs and flowers in right alongside your vegetables, you scramble that scent trail something fierce. The bug can't find its target because there's basil and marigold and dill smell drowning out the signal it's trying to follow. Here's exactly how my grandmother set hers up, and it's the same layout we still use. For every 3 or 4 tomato plants, tuck in 1 basil plant, about 8 to 10 inches off the base of the tomato. Basil turns away aphids, whiteflies, and those big green hornworms, and it's said to make the tomatoes taste a touch sweeter besides. Between rows of cabbage, broccoli, or kale, plant dill or cilantro every 12 to 14 inches. Those herbs turn away the cabbage moths, and when they flower later in the season, they pull in the little wasps and hoverflies that hunt down aphids and caterpillars for a living. So you're pushing away one kind of trouble and calling in help against another kind, all with the same plant. And around the borders of the whole garden, marigolds, the smaller kind, not the big showy ones, spaced about 10 to 12 inches apart. Their roots put something down in the soil that keeps root-eating worms away, and the smell above ground turns off whiteflies and squash bugs. If you're gardening somewhere hot, cilantro bolts to seed too fast in the heat, so swap it out for summer savory instead, and it does the same job. I'd give this one a 4 out of 5. It won't stop every bug cold, but it thins the herd down considerably, and it does it without you lifting another finger past the planting. Now here's a mistake I made for years and years before it finally sunk in. I spent all my energy trying to kill off the bad bugs and never once thought about inviting the good ones in. My father used to remind me that a healthy garden isn't a garden with no bugs at all. It's a garden with the right bugs. Think about what one ladybug can do in a single day, upwards of 50 aphids gone. A little lacewing larva can work through 200 aphids before it's grown. Certain wasps, so small you'd hardly notice them, lay their eggs right inside a hornworm or a cabbage worm and finish the job from the inside out. Ground beetles come out at night and clean up slugs and cutworms while you're asleep. These are the allies, and if you don't give them anywhere to live, they won't stick around to help you. The simplest way to keep them close is what I call a helper strip. Just a narrow section along one edge of the garden, 2 feet wide is plenty, planted thick with flowers. These good bugs need for food: sweet alyssum, yarrow, fennel, dill, and Queen Anne's lace. The trick is keeping something blooming from early spring clear through fall. Because if the flowers stop, the helpers move on to somebody else's garden. Set the sweet alyssum up front since it stays low, then yarrow and dill behind it about 10 to 12 inches apart, and fennel at the back if you've got the room. Within a few weeks of the first blooms, that strip will be humming with hoverflies and wasps and ladybugs, and once they're established, they'll patrol the whole garden, not just that strip. There's another piece to this my grandfather always kept, and it's easy to overlook. He left parts of the property a little wild on purpose. A patch of clover near the garden fence, an unmowed strip along the tree line, a pile of old fence rails where the ground beetles could shelter through the winter. If every inch of your place is mowed bare and swept clean, you've put up a no vacancy sign for the very creatures you're trying to attract. I'd rank this a 4 out of 5 as well. It takes a little patience to build up, but once it's established, it keeps working, season after season, without you having to think about it much at all. This next one is the plainest of all of them, and it might be the most important. Every morning of my childhood before school, before chores got underway in earnest, my grandfather walked that garden. Not fast, not for show, just slow, steady steps up and down every row, turning over leaves, checking the undersides, running his eye along every stem. Here's why that 15 minutes mattered so much. Most real pest damage doesn't happen because of 1 or 2 bugs sitting on a leaf. It happens because a small handful of bugs got left alone long enough to turn into 100. A single hornworm can strip a whole branch bare in 2 days flat. A pair of squash bugs can leave behind hundreds of eggs inside a week. By the time the damage is bad enough to notice from the porch, you're already behind, and no spray in the world is going to catch you back up. So, here's how we still do it on our place. 15, maybe 20 minutes each morning, a small bucket with a bit of water and a splash of dish soap in it. Start at one end of the garden and walk every row. On tomatoes, look up along the stems and the top leaves for hornworms. They camouflage well, so look for their dark little droppings on the leaves underneath as the giveaway. On squash and cucumbers, flip the leaves and look for little clusters of bronze-colored eggs on the undersides. That's squash bugs fixing to hatch, and scraping those off now with your thumbnail saves you a real headache come August. On cabbage and its cousins, watch for small green caterpillars, and the white moths circling around laying more eggs. Anything you find goes straight in the soapy bucket. I've done this most mornings of my life, and I'll tell you, it becomes second nature after a while. It's quiet time before the day gets busy, and it teaches you the rhythm of your own garden in a way no bottle of anything ever could. I'll give this one the full 5 out of 5. It costs nothing but a few minutes, and it catches trouble while it's still small enough to matter. Now, this next trick is one that always made me grin once I understood what was really going on. Instead of trying to keep bugs away from the garden entirely, sometimes you invite them in on purpose, but you send them somewhere that isn't your dinner. This is what's called trap cropping, and my grandfather used it plenty. You plant something the bug likes even better than your real crop, off to the side, and let it draw the trouble away. Nasturtiums are about the best trap crop there is for aphids. They'll cluster on a nasturtium far quicker than they'll bother your beans or peppers. Plant a ring of them around the outside of the garden, 6 to 8 inches apart. Once they're loaded up with aphids, you've got a choice. Pull the plants and be done with it, or leave them be and let the ladybugs from your helper strip come in and feast. For flea beetles, which will tear up eggplant and young cabbage plants something awful, a row of radishes planted a couple feet in front of the main bed will pull them off first. Sacrifice the radish tops, keep the eggplant clean, and for squash bugs and vine borers, a couple of Hubbard squash plants set out at the far corners of the garden work like a magnet, drawing those pests off your main squash and pumpkin plants entirely. You're not trying to save the Hubbard, you're using it as bait. The beauty of this one is it costs you nothing but a little garden space, and once it's planted, it runs the whole season without another lick of work. I'd rank this a 3 out of 5. It's not going to stop everything, but for the specific pests it's aimed at, it works about as well as anything I've ever tried. Now this last one is the only lesson today that involves actually making something, and even then, it only takes about 10 minutes at the stove. For the times when the bugs are heavier than usual, my grandmother kept a recipe that came out of her own kitchen. Nothing bought, nothing fancy. Take 4 or 5 cloves of garlic and a couple of hot peppers. Whatever you've got growing, cayenne works fine, and chop them up fine. Drop them into a quart of warm water and let the whole thing sit overnight, at least 12 hours. Come morning, strain it through cheesecloth into a spray bottle and stir in a teaspoon of plain dish soap, not detergent, just dish soap. The soap helps the spray cling to the leaves, and it breaks down the waxy coating on soft-bodied bugs like aphids. Spray it directly on the plants that are struggling, especially the undersides of the leaves where most trouble hides, and do it early morning or evening, never in the hot midday sun, or the soap can scorch the leaves. One good spraying usually holds the line for 5 to 7 days, and you'll want to spray again after a hard rain washes it off. Now, I want to be straight with you, same as I'd want somebody straight with me. This spray doesn't kill a bug dead on contact the way a bottle off the shelf would. It just makes your plants smell and taste like something they'd rather leave alone. Used together with everything else I've walked you through today, that's plenty. But if you're expecting one, spraying to wipe out a bad infestation overnight by itself, that's not what this does. And I'd rather tell you that now than have you disappointed later. I'd give this one a solid 3 out of 5 on its own. But paired with the rest of what we've covered, it rounds the whole system out nicely. Now let me tell you what actually happens when you put all 6 of these together, because I know some of you are wondering if this is worth the trouble. The first 2 weeks after you start, especially if your garden's had a rough history with bugs, you're still going to see damage. Don't get discouraged. There's still a bug population out there that built up before you ever started this, and it doesn't disappear overnight. But here's what I've watched happen on our place, and what my father watched before me. That first week, the damage is heavy, same as it's always been. Second week, it's still there, but you'll notice it's a touch less than the week before. And right around that 2-week mark, it turns a corner all at once. It goes from heavy to less heavy to almost nothing, and then it just about stops. Not because you sprayed harder, because the whole system finally caught up. The soil got stronger. The good bugs moved in and got established. The companion plants started doing their job, and the bad bugs simply ran out of room to get a foothold. It isn't gradual and slow the whole way through. It holds steady, and then it breaks, sudden as a change in weather. I told you at the start I'd leave you with something I've never seen written down in any garden book. So here it is. When we transplant young seedlings out into the garden, we slip a little collar around the base of each one, made from an old toilet paper roll or a paper towel tube cut into sections. Push it about an inch down into the soil, let it stand a couple inches above ground. That's the whole trick. That little cardboard collar does 2 things. First, it stops cutworms cold. Those are the grubs that crawl along the surface at night and chew clean through the stem of a young plant before you ever see them coming. One bite, and that seedling's finished. The collar simply won't let them reach the stem. Second, that cardboard breaks down on its own over 4 to 6 weeks. Right about the time the stem's grown tough enough that a cutworm couldn't bite through it anyway, even if it wanted to. No plastic, no waste. Just an old cardboard tube and a little patience. That's the whole of it. Build your soil every single year without fail. Plant your companions so the bugs can't find their supper. Give the good bugs a home so they'll do the fighting for you. Walk your garden every morning while the trouble's still small enough to matter. Set out a trap crop to pull the worst offenders somewhere you don't mind losing. And when you need a little extra, mix up what my grandmother kept in that tin box by the stove. I want to leave you with this too. There's nothing wrong with a hardware store, and there's nothing wrong with modern life. But there's something we lost when we started believing a garden couldn't survive without a bottle standing between us and the bugs. My grandfather never believed that for one day of his life, and neither did his garden ever go hungry for it. None of this came out of a laboratory. It came out of a hard, lean stretch of American history when nobody had the money for a bottle of anything, and folks had to figure out how to grow food that lasted, using nothing but dirt, patience, and what they already had on hand. My grandfather passed it to my father passed it to me, and now I'm passing it to you, because I don't think this kind of knowledge ought to die out just because it got old-fashioned. If it's worth anything to you, it's worth passing along to somebody else too. If you want the whole system written out, every companion pairing, every home remedy, the full year-round calendar my family's kept for 100 years, that's all sitting in the Depression-era survival manual. Links down in the description, same as always. And if you stuck with me this far, I've got another one coming next week, about how my grandmother kept a root cellar running clean through a whole winter without a single potato going soft. You won't want to miss that one. Thanks for spending this time with me. I'll see you in the next one.